Chapter 20 Palm Sunday. Keeping watch over the court, the guard was now staring straight at Amon. Amon quickly looked away and pulled his hand back, his thoughts swirling in a fog of fear. 2 moments more and he would have been caught stealing from the high priest's scribe. Amon willed himself to slow his breathing and think. He was trying to form a plan, but for each thing he thought of, he could think of 12 reasons why it wouldn't work. He was right in the middle of one of these thoughts when suddenly someone slammed into him from behind. Amon was pushed forward so hard that he fell to the ground, bashing his right knee onto the marble steps. A moment later, the shock passed and Amon pulled himself up on all fours, and there below him, hidden from everyone, was the stack of parchments. Like a flash of lightning, Amon pulled the top sheet off the stack and hid it inside his tunic. Hands were helping him up now, and a tall, straight man was apologizing for bumping into Amon. Amon turned to the man to accept the apology, but instead he gasped. It was Joseph of Arimathea. "Forgive my clumsiness, young man," Joseph was saying, but with his face hidden from the guard overhead, he gave a wink to Amon. Amon stared for a moment, then shook his head. "No harm done," he said, understanding now that this had been no accident, "and no trespass made." They bowed to each other, then Amon wandered over to the edge of the court. Hidden now under the roof of the portico, Amon pulled both the scrap of parchment and the scribe's list from under his tunic. He stared at them for many minutes, comparing the lines of the particular letter on one of the lines of the same letter on the other. Finally, he knew. At that moment, the sounds of a riot went up from the crowd outside of the court of Israel. All the men started pushing their way out into the court of women. Amon followed, wanting to know what was going on. The noise outside the temple was so loud that Amon thought the whole city must be in battle. As he passed through the gates to the court of women, Amon felt a tug at his sleeve. It was Benjamin, with Tamar close behind. "What's going on?" Benjamin asked his older friend. "I do not know, but we will find out." They entered the court of the Gentiles and saw that hundreds of people were rushing to the eastern side. Looking over the edge to the left, Amon saw squads of Roman soldiers rushing from the fortress of Antonia, taking up stations around the Temple Mount. Amon led his little group over to the portico at just about the spot where he and Tamar had first looked across the Kidron Valley so many days before. The three friends leaned over the side of the wall. Below was a sight such as none of them had ever seen. Reaching across the Kidron Valley from the Mount of Olives to the Golden Gate of the city was another bridge, right below Amon and his friends. The bridge was filled with hundreds of people now, all of them waving palm branches and laying their coats across the roadway. Just in the middle of the bridge, Amon spotted a man riding a young donkey being praised and worshipped by all the people. "It's Jesus!" Tamar screamed. "That's Jesus of Nazareth!" Amon looked at Tamar in surprise, then swung back to the scene below him. All the people were still waving palm branches and shouting, "Hosanna! Hosanna to the King!" Others shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David!" And above all the others, Amon heard one woman cry, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." As Jesus drew closer to the city gates, the cries of the crowd grew louder, and Amon found himself getting caught up in the emotion. "Hosanna!" he shouted. "Hosanna to the King!" Then suddenly he realized what he was saying. Stepping back from the wall, he stumbled away, wondering at his own curious behavior. Remembering why he was there in the first place, Amon rushed back to the court of women. Benjamin and Tamar followed, and soon the court began to fill with people again as the spectacle outside the wall passed through the gate and into the city. Amon quickly told his friends what had happened before the interruption, and now all three began to look for the scribe. They spotted him in the middle of the 15 semicircular steps that led up to the court of Israel. He was holding his stack of parchments and standing right next to Caiaphas. The high priest seemed to have gone mad. He was ranting and yelling loud enough for everyone in the court to hear. "This Jesus is a menace," he screamed. "He is disrupting the entire city. He must be stopped." Other priests and scribes were gathered around Caiaphas trying to calm him, but the high priest continued his tirade. Amon knew he would never get close to the scribe nearly like this. Suddenly, from behind him, Amon heard another sound. There was a yell as if someone had just seen something horrible, then a commotion so great it seemed as if the walls themselves would collapse. In screams, the crowd parted, pulling back to the edges of the court, and Amon saw the man Jesus knocking over tables and smashing chests of money to the ground. Time seemed to slow for Amon as he watched the man. He was tall and strong, perhaps the most rugged-looking man Amon had ever seen. Yet even in his rage he had a face so kind and gentle that instantly Amon knew he could tell the man any secret in the world and feel as if it would be safe with him. Sweat flew from the man's brows. He flung crates of doves and bowls of grain from the tables of the sellers. Amon watched the man for only seconds, but in those seconds felt as if he lived a year. Now the man was opening his mouth, and Amon could see he was going to yell something. He held a chest of money over his head, and as the first of his words thundered like the roar of a lion, "It is written that in my house, it is written that my house shall be called a house of prayer," Jesus roared, "but you are making it a den of thieves." And with that, Jesus smashed the chest of money to the ground, and coins flew in every direction. Amon suddenly snapped out of his trance. People were diving at the money, grabbing what they could. Men who had been up in the court of Israel came running down the steps, pushing Caiaphas and the other priests to the side and into the crowd. Amon saw that Neri was separated from Caiaphas and caught up in the sea of bodies. With Benjamin and Tamar on his heels, Amon fought against the tide of money-seekers, grabbed Neri by the tunic, and pulled him under the roof of the portico at the edge of the court. "What do you want?" Neri stammered at the three young people who now surrounded him. A moment later Neri recognized Amon, and his face went white. Amon was not trying to be cruel, but knew he had little time. Holding the scrap of parchment in front of Neri's face, "You slipped this note to me in the market," he said. "Now tell me what it means." Neri started trembling as if all the bones in his body had suddenly turned to water. I I know not of what you speak," he said. Amon pulled the other page of parchment out from under his tunic and held it up. "This page you wrote not an hour ago," he said, then held up the two parchments together, "and it matches exactly the writing on the note. Now please," Amon pleaded, "tell me what it means." Neri looked around nervously, but there was still chaos in the courtyard, and their conversation was going unnoticed. Then Neri seemed to find his skeleton again. He stopped shaking, stood up straight, and said, "Very well. It will be good to share this secret with someone." Amon, Tamar, Benjamin, and the scribe Neri moved farther back into the shadows. Priests' eyes could pry deeply into dark places, they knew, and none of them wanted to get caught sharing this particular secret. "It began many months ago," Neri started his story, "maybe even more than a year. It began," he repeated, "when Caiaphas first started hearing stories about this Jesus of Nazareth." Amon stared at the scribe, blinking in disbelief. "All this is because of some false Messiah?" he asked. "False or not, I do not know," Neri continued, "but dangerous to Caiaphas indeed. At first he was just amused by the stories. I once heard him say how dull the commoners must be to be fooled by smooth words and trickery. But then reports started coming in about this Jesus criticizing the priests and Pharisees, telling the people that the law of Moses had been abolished." "He never said that," Tamar whispered angrily. Neri shrugged. "Those are the reports we heard. But true or not, they drove Caiaphas mad, especially when he heard how many people were believing in Jesus." Amon shook his head, trying to figure this all out. "But what has that got to do with my father and the stolen money?" he asked. Neri scanned the court of women again, making sure no one was watching. "That is next in my story," he said, and Amon wished he would tell his story more quickly. "The day before Caiaphas gave the dinner and you entertained that last week," he said, with a nod to Amon, "word arrived that this Jesus had performed another miracle, and he had done it on the Sabbath." Amon gasped. "One cannot work on the Sabbath. It is holy," he said in anger, forgetting that he himself had broken the Sabbath just the day before. Neri nodded quickly in agreement. "Yes, yes, but Jesus told the Pharisees who were there that the Sabbath was created for man's benefit, not man for the Sabbath. Amon vaguely remembered Tamar telling him those same words, though he hadn't paid much attention at the time. People were starting to leave the temple courts now, heading home for a noon meal, or to attend to other business. Amon knew it wouldn't be long before the high priest wondered where his chief scribe was. "And so," he said, urging the scribe to continue. "And so," Neri echoed, "Caiaphas decided that this Jesus must—" Tamar gasped. Benjamin's eyes shot wide open. Amon simply nodded. "Perhaps that is so," Amon said after a moment, "if he is a danger to our laws, but I still don't under—" Caiaphas knew he would never get a popular prophet like Jesus condemned for insulting a few Pharisees, Neri interrupted. He knew— Neri stopped abruptly and flattened himself against the wall of the portico. Amon followed Neri's gaze and saw Caiaphas, the high priest, standing at the top of the half-circle stairs, searching the faces of the people in the court of women. Amon didn't need to guess whom he was looking for. "Hurry!" Amon whispered. With his eyes still on Caiaphas, Neri matched Amon's whisper and doubled his speed. "Caiaphas knew he would need people to lie about Jesus," he said, "and he knew that would cost money. But the only money he had access to is—" Once again Neri stopped in mid-sentence. Amon glanced over his shoulder to see Caiaphas descending the stairway one slow step at a time, still searching the courtyard. Instantly Amon calculated that by the time the high priest reached the bottom, he'd be no more than 15 feet from them. "Tell me quickly!" Amon hissed again. "Caiaphas only has access to temple money," Neri said in a rush. "He knew it would be blasphemy to use money dedicated to God for the purpose of having a man falsely condemned to death. So he needed—" Amon saw the end of the story and finished the thought. "So he needed to get money from the personal treasuries of the merchants." Neri pursed his lips and nodded. "When Gamaliel told him about you and your family, Caiaphas formed a plan to get your father to the treasury." Amon stared at the scribe for a long moment. "Neri," he said at last, and in much more calm tones, "who stole the money from the treasury?" Neri finally looked away from the courtyard and looked Amon straight in the eye. Then he said just one word, a word that shot through Amon like a spear of a Roman soldier. "Caiaphas." And then in a rush Neri flew to the side of his master and greeted him warmly, leaving one young man and 2 children feeling as if they'd just been struck by lightning.